Good morning. The Labour Party is still reeling from its defeat at the general election. It's facing an uphill battle to win back the public. Some say it's even a fight for its very survival. Today we'll speak to the four candidates who think they can turn round Labour's fortunes and eventually walk through the door of number 10. Welcome to the Sunday Politics Leadership Debate. I'm Andrew Neil. Yes, they've applied for what's probably the toughest job in British politics at the moment. They have to convince a wounded party to back them. And at the same time, they have to start persuading the voters that they could be the best candidate for Prime Minister at the general election in 5 years' time. The men and women who've applied for the job are Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Liz Kendall is Shadow Health Minister. Shadow Health Secretary Andy Burnham. And Jeremy Corbyn is a Labour backbencher. Now, in a moment, the candidates will be setting out why they believe they've got what it takes to lead Labour. But first, here's a reminder of how we got here. Corbyn lost the general election and lost it badly. Labour won 26 fewer seats than in 2010, while the Conservatives triumphed with an overall majority for the first time since 1992. Mr Miliband swiftly fell on his sword and resigned, triggering a leadership election.
The party needs to have an open and honest debate about the right way forward, without constraint.
His resignation prompted a flurry of criticism and soul-searching within the party, as some warned it could be locked out of power for a generation. One of the early front-runners, Chuka Umunna, dropped out just days into the contest, citing unwelcome media attention. And late entrant Jeremy Corbyn squeaked through the nominations process at the last minute after some in the party called for a wide debate. Since nominations closed, the four candidates have been speaking at Hustings in front of Labour supporters up and down the country. But acting leader Harriet Harman said this leadership contest would be different from 2010, with a series of open, televised debates. It's no cosy contest.
Think not who you like and who makes you feel comfortable, but think who actually will be able to reach out to the public and actually listen to the public and give them confidence.
In August, ballot papers go out to Labour Party members, supporters who've paid £3 and union members who've registered to take part. We'll find out who the winner is in September. Over the next 50 minutes, you decide who's got what it takes to be next Labour leader, future Prime Minister.
Yes, when acting leader Harriet Harman launched this contest, she said that she wanted the voting public as well as Labour Party members to get to know the candidates. So we're going to ask the four of them to introduce themselves and set out why they're the right man or woman for the job. Here's an example. I'm Andrew Neil, and I've covered every Labour leadership contest since Jim Callaghan in '76. A little earlier, they all drew lots to decide the order in which they'll make their statements, and Yvette Cooper won, or lost, depending on your point of view. So, Yvette Cooper, please take your position here. Yvette Cooper has been Shadow Home Secretary since 2011. Before that, she held a number of ministerial jobs in Gordon Brown's government, including Work and Pension Secretary.
I'm Yvette Cooper. I watched the news on Budget Day and there was a working mum who's in tears at what the tax credit cuts will mean for her family, and I hate what the Tories are doing to families in Britain. But if we want to change that, we have to rebuild to win. And we need a leader strong enough to take the Tories on, not to swallow their myths, but strong enough to change our party so we reach out and don't push people away. Born in Scotland, brought up in England, my family are from the north. I went to a comprehensive in the south. And I love the diversity of our country. I want us to have a stronger economy and a fairer, less divided Britain, to back the good jobs of the future, invest in science, work with business, and also to fight injustice, to end child poverty in our lifetime. We need a leader who can be a Labour Prime Minister, not just someone who makes us feel good about the party. It's not enough to be angry at the world. With a Labour Party, we have to change the world.
Yvette Cooper, you once said that, and I quote, "The difficult thing in politics can be sometimes be the earnestness all the time." So what are you going to do to lighten the mood of the Labour Party?
You want me to tell a joke? Because there's a challenge to me to tell a joke. The trouble is, part of the reason that we end up being earnest is because actually there's so many things to do and so many things. I'm not doing this because I want to be something. I'm doing this because I want to do something. You're right. That means there's always a risk of being earnest.
All right.
It's because there's so many problems to face.
Thank you very much for that. Now, Liz Kendall has been in the Commons since 2010, which means that she's the newest MP of the Labour candidate. She attends Labour's shadow cabinet as Shadow Minister for Care and Older People.
I'm Liz Kendall, and I'm standing to be Labour's next leader and Prime Minister because I love our party too much to see us lose again, and because I believe Britain's future can be so much brighter than it is. I want to lead a country where everyone has the chance to fulfil their potential, no matter where you're born, what your parents did, or the colour of your skin. That's how we make our economy stronger and our society fairer. But we can't put our values into practice because we lost the election. People didn't trust us on the economy or with their taxes. And we didn't have a positive vision of a better life that everyone could feel part of. So I won't pretend that more of the same with a different face will be enough to win next time. And I won't stay quiet while some try and turn us into an unelectable party of protest. So let's make a fresh start, win in 2020 and change our country for the better.
Liz Kendall, you've said before that you love rap music and you often listen to Public Enemy before speaking in the Commons chamber. So what did you listen to prepare for this debate this morning?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't go out for my run. That's one of the issues about being busy on an election campaign. But I do like not just rap, I like a bit of 80s pop as well. Anything that gets me going in the morning.
Very well. Thank you for that. Now, Andy Burnham has served as both Culture Secretary and Health Secretary in Gordon Brown's government. He's been Labour's Shadow Health Secretary since 2011.
I'm Andy Burnham. I am standing to change Labour, but also to change politics. I know you are fed up with politicians speaking in soundbites, with parties that all sound the same. While life has been getting harder and the challenge is bigger, politics in this country has got pettier and smaller. No wonder we look out of touch. Westminster has done nothing as the dream of home ownership has died for millions. It has discriminated for decades against young people who want a technical education. And it has turned its gaze away from people and communities most affected by immigration. Well, no more. I will put Labour back in touch with people. I will speak for the whole country, and the Labour Party I lead will get back to doing what it does best and provide something in very short supply in this country right now.
Andy Burnham, you've said, I'm a prima donna. I'm well known for letting others put in the hard graft. I like to do nothing for 89 minutes. Now, that was you describing your football style. Is that how you'd lead your party?
Well, you might say typical politician. That's the kind of footballer I am. I'm on the 6-yard box, but ready to pounce when the chance comes, and that's what Labour needs. It needs somebody who's ready to seize the moment and put the ball away, and that's the winner that the Labour Party needs.
OK, Andy Burnham, thank you very much. Now, of the candidates, Jeremy Corbyn has been an MP for longest. He's held his seat in North London since 1983, but he's never held ministerial office.
I'm Jeremy Corbyn. I've been proud to be a Labour MP for the last 32 years, representing my constituents, standing up for justice at home and abroad. I believe that is what the Labour Party is really about. But over the years, we've lost our way. We've been cowed and frightened by powerful commercial interests and very much frightened by the press, frightened to stand up for what we believe in. I want a society where everyone cares for everyone else, an economy that works for all, where no one is forgotten, and I want the Labour Party to be the heart of demanding those things. Our society is moving in the wrong direction. Too much inequality, too much poverty. For too many people, their job and their housing is not a source of security, but a cause of anxiety. We need to change that, and I believe we can.
Jeremy Corbyn, you said you want the royal family evicted from Buckingham Palace to more modest dwellings, was your phrase. Would Prime Minister Corbyn be comfortable in the lavish surroundings of 10 Downing Street and Chequers?
I think I'd be probably happier at Road N7.
Very well. Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much. Let's get to the debate. We're going to start now with the economy. Liz Kendall, was failing to admit that the last Labour government spent too much in the run-up to the great crash. Was that your biggest mistake in trying to overcome the view that Labour couldn't be trusted on the economy?
No, I actually think our biggest mistake was to take too long to realise that the scale of the deficit and the debt, which was caused by the global financial crisis, not by Labour's spending, that would mean tough decisions for us, and that over the last 5 years we talked the talk but didn't actually show the difference that we would make or the tough decisions that we would make. And I think that's more of a problem. That's why people think...
But were you spending too much before the Lehman Brothers crash came?
Yes, I think we should have reined spending in before the crash, but that didn't cause the crash, which was global. And the reason for the deficit and the debt is we had to put the money into the banks, because if we hadn't done that, all of our money and businesses' money would have gone. But the real problem for us, Andrew, was over the last 5 years we didn't seem to wake up to the fact that tough decisions would have to be made or to set out an alternative. And that's a real problem for us in future, because if we keep saying what we have over the last 5 years over the next, we'll get the same result and we'll lose.
Andy Burnham, you've now admitted that Labour spent too much in the run-up to the crash after all these years of growth. But you did spend the last 5 years arguing the opposite. Why did you change your mind, or are you just a slow learner?
Well, I wasn't leader of the party or shadow chancellor in that period, but I've said that I believe we spent too much because I was Chief Secretary to the Treasury when Alistair Darling asked me to conduct a spending review where we brought the deficit down. And I've acknowledged that. But our biggest mistake was not to defend Labour's economic record. We ran a strong economy for 10 years from 97 to 2007. We ran more surpluses in our first term than the Thatcher and Major governments combined. We did fix the roof while the sun was shining, the roofs of those schools and hospitals where water was pouring through.
Why didn't you?
Because I wasn't leading the party at the time. I think the biggest mistake was to allow the Tories to hang that millstone of Labour's mess around our necks unfairly, but also to fail to face up to our mistakes. Because if we had have done that, and if we'd said early on that, yes, we did let the deficit get too high, the public would have given us more credit for what we got right.
You don't agree with that, Yvette Cooper, do you? You don't agree the deficit was too high. And if it wasn't, after 15 years of economic growth, in what circumstances would you ever run a surplus?
Well, as you know, those 15 years that you talk about, of those, only 10 of those years were under Labour, and 4 of those Labour years, in fact, we did run a surplus. So where I disagree with Andy is, look, I think it's, we had a small deficit just before the financial crisis, and I did...
Well, hold on. We had according to the OECD, we had the highest structural deficit in Europe other than Greece.
The current deficit at the time, just before the crisis, was 0.6%. As you know, it wasn't the deficit that caused the financial crisis, it was the financial crisis that caused the deficit.
No one is saying that. No one is saying that the deficit caused the crisis. What we're saying, the argument we're getting you to address, is that after 15 years of economic growth, we still had the highest structural deficit in Europe, bar Greece. But was that sensible?
Andrew, you know, as I've said, ideally the small deficit would have been a surplus. However, the reason that we had the deficit at that time was because tax revenues didn't come in. I think there is a big problem about what happened with tax forecasting, about what should have been done about tax avoidance.
No, I'm talking about the years 2006, 2007. Tax revenues were booming.
But hang on
you got £84 billion a year alone from the City of London.
Actually,
they were booming.
No, the tax revenues were lower than was forecast, and there was considerable over-optimism in the forecast. But the point is that the point that Andy and others have made is that somehow what was happening with public spending made us too weak to deal with the financial crisis that it happened. And as you know, debt, in fact, was really low because of the surpluses that Labour had run in the past. Because debt was so low, we were able to support the car industry. Let me finish the answer first.
You added to the national debt.
We were able to...
Excuse me, Yvette Cooper, you've just said something that's factually not true.
But
debt rose under the last Labour government. It went from 300 billion to 500 billion before the crash.
But as you know, debt as a proportion of our national income grew. Debt as a proportion of our national income fell. The reason, because debt was so low, we were able to support the car industry, the car scrappage scheme. We were able to cut VAT, support the economy. We were able to give extra help to pensioners through the financial crisis. And most important of all, we were able to stop Royal Bank of Scotland and other banks crashing. So I just think it is wrong to say, as Andy's done, that we should apologise for public spending on our NHS, on Sure Start, on our public services. That did not cause the financial crisis. And we should take on the Tory myths.
This is where we disagree, because Yvette just said, ideally we should have run a surplus. I don't think we can be that vague about something this important. It's right to say, in the good times, we should be aiming to run a surplus, as Labour did in our first term. we lost that discipline in the beginning of our third term. And I know that because I was Chief Secretary when Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling asked me to start bringing the deficit down. We began to do that, but Andrew, the ink was barely dry on that spending review before the crash came. So the deficit was too big when the crash came, and we were then in a weaker position.
That spending review increased spending,
All right.
increased investment.
Let me bring in Jeremy Corbyn.
The spending review actually increased public spending lower than overall growth in the economy, and that's why it was going to bring the deficit.
Hold on. I need to. There are four of you fighting for this leadership. I'm sorry, Yvette Cooper, there are four of you. You can't hog the stage. Jeremy Corbyn, are there any limits on the amount you would borrow to build socialism?
You don't have to borrow to build socialism. You have to grow an economy and have an equal society in order to ensure that we eliminate the most ghastly poverty that exists in Britain at the present time.
You
don't do it all. Of course, you borrow for infrastructure, you borrow for investment, and the last Labour government did borrow, did invest. Railways, for example, I wished it had invested more in housing, which would have actually been now saving us a great deal of money on the housing benefit bill.
But is it right,
for example?
Is it right at the moment to continue to bear down on the deficit or not?
It's right at the moment to look at the issues that face Britain. One of them is low tax incomes because of low wages. The other are vast levels of tax avoidance and tax evasion that goes on, probably £50 billion per year. I think we bear down on those two things
What I
first.
asked you was, is it right to continue to bear down on the deficit? Yes or no?
We should ultimately have a lower deficit, but the most important thing is to get the economy growing properly, and you do that by investing. Therefore, you don't set an arbitrary date to move into budget.
So you would borrow more?
Borrow only for investment in capital projects and infrastructure.
You wouldn't borrow to cover current spending?
You try not to borrow to cover current spending. Nobody would ever say never on that, but the general view should be you should borrow for investment.
OK. Let me just ask you some questions on some key policies in which you all fought the election campaign to see where you stand now. Would you keep your manifesto pledge to reintroduce the top rate of income tax of 50 pence?
I think it's the right thing to do now because the deficit is still too high. But obviously we have to see where we are at the time of the general election. I hope that the deficit will have come down, but we'll have to see what George Osborne has delivered.
Liz Kendall.
No, I don't think it's right to reintroduce the 50p rate. We all want a fair tax system, but I think the evidence suggests that wasn't bringing in the extra money, and I think it's really good that Chris Leslie, our Shadow Chancellor, has already taken that issue head on, and I agree with that.
All right. Andy Burnham.
I think it is justified now, particularly when we've just had a budget that's cutting the incomes and the tax credits of working people. How does that look fair to them?
We only had it for a very short time. I would bring back the 50 pence rate. It does bring in more money. It would help to deal with some of the problems of spending, particularly in local government.
How much would it bring in?
About 5 billion.
Where does that figure come from?
From research that I've had done for me.
By whom?
By very clever people.
Not the IFS, not the OBR.
No.
Who think it'll bring in a lot less, if anything. You would want more than 50p, wouldn't you?
Yes, of course. Ultimately, you may need to go higher, but I think that...
How much?
I'm not putting a figure on that, but what I would say is we really need to turn the conversation onto the levels of tax avoidance and tax evasion, which are well around £50 billion per year, and that includes closing down tax havens around Britain and in British territories, as well as around Europe, such as Monaco and Luxembourg.
What power do you have to close Monaco?
We don't, but we're part of the European Union, and the French do. We have the Channel Islands, the Isle of Man, the Cayman Islands.
What happens if they just went independent?
Sorry?
What happens if they just went independent?
Well, if they go independent, that's their choice. But
no, but you wouldn't close them down as a tax haven.
Well, yeah, hang on a minute. We have a culture of tax evasion and tax avoidance by big business in Britain, and we need to bear down on those businesses. Okay. Boots conveniently moving their headquarters out of Britain to Switzerland. We should charge them tax.
You can't close down Switzerland, I assume.
No, but you can charge Boots tax for the trade that it does in the UK, rather than this convenient bookkeeping exercise to evade taxation.
Let me move on to the next screen. Would you keep your manifesto pledge to introduce a mansion tax? Andy Burnham.
Well, I said I thought it was a mistake. The principle is right, because council taxation has not been reset since the early 90s when it came in. So you've got some very high value properties that are not taxed. But I personally believe the mansions tax sounded envious, politics of envy, spiteful. I would rather have a bigger rebalancing of land and property taxation. And I think the mansions tax was actually the wrong way to do it.
Liz Kendall.
No, I don't think we should keep that. But I tell you what I wouldn't do, which is the inheritance tax cut that the
All right.
Tories...
I understand that, but that wasn't in your manifesto.
No, but
I'm asking you about policies in your manifesto. The mansion tax was, and you were against inheritance tax. You were against inheritance tax. Jeremy Corbyn, mansion tax.
I would much rather we had, instead of a mansion tax, a series of bans for property tax.
For higher priced properties.
Higher priced properties, which would actually be much fairer and probably bring in more money and be of greater assistance to local.
So a general revaluation of property.
Revaluation possibly, but more bans, higher income bans or higher value bans would be much more important, actually, particularly in London and the South East.
Indeed. Yvette Cooper.
I think it was the right policy for the last election because we had to show how we were going to raise the money to get the extra nurses, the extra support,
Well,
the
only
National
raised
Health
the billion.
Service that we needed. Well, I think that was important about getting the extra staff that we needed in the health service and important to show where the money was coming from. But I think we should I don't think we should be committed to it again. For the next election, I think we have to look at all of that again.
All right, thank you for that. Let's move on to welfare. It's been in the news. Liz Kendall, would you support government plans to restrict child tax credits in future to 2 children?
I don't want to see child tax credits cut from poor and low-paid families. But I thought that Harriet Harman was right to say to us as a party, we've lost the election, and one of the big reasons why was that people didn't trust us on welfare. And if we keep saying and doing the things we've done over the last 5 years, over the next 5 years, we will get the same results. So I wanted to support and back Harriet for raising a very difficult issue for us as a party, but she was right to do that.
Right, but you could be leader of your party by September when this issue will come back before the House of Commons, in which for future families, no tax credits after 2 children. Would you support that?
If we can show how we would pay for it to be reversed, that's at the heart of why people...
I'm not talking about reversing, I'm talking about introducing it. Would you support it or wouldn't you?
I understand, but if we were to oppose it, we would have to show how would we pay for that if we were in government now. That's exactly what you would ask us. Every journalist would.
But that's true of anything you oppose.
Of course. And that is my point. That
I'm still not clear if you're going to be for or against it.
If we can show how we would make sure that we didn't have to make that decision, how would we fund it, then that's the right way forward. Because if people don't trust us, if they keep thinking you oppose, spend more and more and more, then they will believe they can't trust us with their money. And Harriet was right to raise that.
You said that, Yvette Cooper?
Against it. I think that I'm the oldest of 3 children. I've got 3 children. I think there are families with 3 kids who are going to end up worse off in work as a result of this change. That is bad for them, but it's also bad for the economy.
But we're talking about
and
future
it's bad
families.
For the taxpayer as well. Yeah, and imagine, so a family with 3 kids who are doing well, and then dad walks out, and mum's left holding the babies, literally, and suddenly she's going to be able to be struggling to afford her childcare and end up worse off in work. So that's why I think this is a really bad.
So there should be no limit, in your view, on the amount of tax credit that goes to the number of children you have?
I think it's a problem, the government trying to have this 2-child policy. And I'll give you one other example as to why it's a bad thing. They've got this policy which says you can have the tax credit for the 3rd child if you've been raped. Well, what does that mean? Rape victims have to prove to the DWP that their child is a result of a rape or take the forensic evidence.
Sure,
to the
but all
benefit
laws are
system.
difficult to implement at the margin. You're against the principle.
I'm against it because I think it's damaging for work.
Jeremy Corbyn.
I'm absolutely against the principle. We were proud to sign the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which guarantees equality for all children. I think this is an appalling idea. The large families that have living in a degree of poverty, why are we saying that they should be made even poorer because they're a large family? Surely every child
What
matters.
Harriet Harman said, I'm only quoting your acting leader, so don't get irascible with
No,
me.
I wouldn't be irascible with you
Well,
or her.
I'm glad to hear it. This is not Channel 4 News. What Harriet Harman said is if you can't afford the 3rd child, you shouldn't have it.
Well,
she didn't say that. And
excuse me, she was on the Sunday Politics.
Well,
it was the words to that effect.
She did not
I think
say
we're
that,
all
Andrew,
grown
that's
up enough to
unfair.
know how
That is
children
unfair.
come about. And stuff happens, children get born, they should all be cherished, loved and valued. We shouldn't be having the state...
So you're
deciding.
against it?
I'm absolutely
Andy
against
Burnham.
it. I think it's completely wrong.
Completely against it. It's the worst trait of this divisive Chancellor. It's dog whistle politics. It's dividing one family from another, and it's a judgmental policy. I'm like Yvette, middle of 3 children, have 3 of my own. You know, why should we have this situation where we're saying some families deserve more support than others? I'm against it. Tax credits support people in work, Andrew. They're a big achievement of the Labour government. And do you know why? You know what? I've led the opposition against this week within the Labour Party because Labour has to stand for something. We've got to be proud of what we achieved when we were in government, and that is supporting people in work.
Did you raise this with Harriet Harman in Shadow Cabinet?
I did, and I said I thought it was wrong. I believe tax credits are one of the biggest and best things we did because they support people...
Andy,
1 second, Liz. They support people in work and people into work. And the problem with George Osborne's budget is it diminished those work incentives. And it isn't going to do what he claims he is doing as Chancellor.
We all agree
Labour's
with that,
got to take a stand on things that matter.
But let me ask you, Andy, how, you know, out of all of the proposals that George Osborne has put forward, which ones do you support?
I've said I support the principle of a cap on benefits. People out there don't... Wait, well, let me answer your question. Liz, let me answer your question.
That raises a tiny amount of money. Listen, people don't trust us on welfare.
It'd be nice if you let me answer your question.
And if we don't change what we've been saying and doing and setting out an alternative, and I think that's the question.
And that's the point you've made, Andy Burnham.
I said I support the principle of a cap.
Not
people
the
don't
actual
support
cap.
the idea of people receiving more in benefits than people get when they earn than they earn in wages. But I would get the housing benefit bill down a different way. I think, like Jeremy said, let's allow councils to build more council homes so that we don't have so many people in private rented accommodation where the landlord rakes in the housing benefit but doesn't put a penny of that money back into the upkeep of those properties.
And he's right on that. The majority of the housing
Corbyn.
benefit bill actually goes directly to private sector landlords, particularly in London and the South East. We have got to rebalance it by building council homes and controlling the private rented sector, including caps on rent levels.
Well, we've got to make sure that the debt and the deficit come down. But I think where I disagree with Liz is I think she's making the mistake of thinking that all of the Tory policies, we therefore have to start from them. I don't think we do. And also I don't think we have to start by accepting George Osborne's numbers. He changes them every single time. Since between March and July, he's changed his numbers all over again and increased his borrowing.
Right, but here's the broader picture.
So I think what you're saying is different from our welfare policy of the last 5 years.
I think, for example, we should have a universal childcare system. That's what we should be doing. That would help far more people into work.
What's the answer to Liz Kendall's question? That in what way is what you're arguing different from your policy for the 5 years?
I think we need to be much more ambitious about the childcare
that
is
mean?
preventing so many parents working.
And how
the
would we
government
fund
has
that?
cut back on childcare at the moment. They've reduced the childcare. I think we should support it.
How would
I think
you
it's
fund
right
that?
that we shouldn't do the inheritance tax cut that the government has introduced. But I also think it is a mistake to think that, you know, that somehow we have to prove line by line what George Osborne... Yes, you are, but what's what you're just saying to George line by line for George Osborne
I
would
think that
do.
we could change what he said on working tax credits, which is going to hit 3 million low-paid working people hard, which is that we can look at an alternative, which is the £100 billion we spend a year on tax reliefs, many of which have a good result and others that don't, and that's why I've asked Margaret Hodge to look at that. To govern is to choose. I've set out an alternative.
And I think it's a good one. And to be fair to Liz, I think her tax reliefs review is an extremely good one to do. But I think you've also got to make sure that you get the economy growing, that you get productivity going, that you increase science support.
Of course, but that's so vague that it's impossible to see what a policy... I want to put a point to Andy Burnham, who's been silent. I need to bring...
Not just start from...
I understand that. You've both had a pretty good run. I need to broaden it out to the other two candidates here. You all say that you've had a hell of a dramatic defeat, that the scale of the defeat is much worse than you thought it would be. But listening to you, it's still pretty much business as usual.
Not at all.
You haven't got a dramatic response.
I don't know how you can say that, because at the beginning of this programme, I faced up to the things we got wrong on the economy. And I've also faced up in this leadership election to the challenges we've got on immigration. There are many people around this country who see the effects of immigration in their communities, wages being undercut, pressure at the GP surgery and primary schools, and they feel Westminster just doesn't pay any attention to that. And I've said that. I said that at the beginning of this programme, so I don't know how you can put that point that you've just made to me, because I have faced up to those difficult issues throughout this leadership contest.
But we have yet to see what the dramatic policy response would be to rescue you from your own self-described predicament.
Well, I need to recommend my speeches to you more often. Maybe you should read them, because I've said on immigration, we, yes, should support free movement of labour, but wait a second, but not freedom to claim. I've also said we need to agree with Europe as part of this renegotiation measures to stop the undercutting of wages of the skilled workforce. Thirdly...
You said all that before the election.
No, thirdly...
You said that before the election.
Thirdly, I've said that communities that are most affected with pressure on primary school places and GP surgery should get funding directly from Europe to help those communities deal with the effects of migration.
Jeremy Corbyn, you've been consistent in opposing all welfare cuts and most public spending if it wasn't defence. What do you think is the better model for Corbynomics? Is it high-spending Greece with a youth unemployment rate of over 60%, or tax and spending Venezuela, where inflation's over 60% and they've run out of loo paper?
Our economy is nothing like that of Greece or Venezuela, and I think everyone's very well aware of that. I think our problem in the general election was that whilst we were offering a number of very good policies in many areas, fundamentally we were going to be continuing with cuts in public spending. There was going to be a continuation of underfunding local government. There was going to be more library closures, more swimming pool closures, and all the other things that we really dislike under a Labour government. Why have we chosen an arbitrary date to move into budget surplus? I instead would challenge the austerity agenda, because the austerity agenda is fundamentally a political agenda which has led to many of the gross inequalities that exist in Britain today.
But we've seen what happens if you just spend in other countries. You end up like Greece.
Well, what you do is collect your tax
like Venezuela.
And the people of Greece were shortchanged by the elites, by the businesses and by the banks. It's not the poor people in Greece that caused the problem. The issue is in Britain we do not collect the tax that's owed.
You know, they were sold a lie, which is you can have everything you want without making any changes yourself, and that's why Cyprus had to back down. Now we need a decent, sustainable settlement in Greece.
Look at the victims of what the European Central Bank are doing to Greece. The poverty, the unemployment, and the European Central Bank and the European Union will rue the day.
You don't have to tell me about the people who are suffering in Greece,
rue the day.
But you don't find a ladder out of the hole that Greece has got into.
We'll rue the day that they've put this punishment.
And that's not
Can I finish?
what Syriza...
We'll put the punishment on the people of Greece.
Okay. All right. Liz Kendall, let me ask you, if you become leader, but Jeremy does very well in this election campaign, will you have him in your shadow cabinet?
I haven't made any decisions about that yet, but
what do you think?
I don't think Jeremy and my politics is anything like, the same. And I think there is a challenge for centre-left parties across Europe. On the one hand, avoiding the kind of ever-increasing austerity that sees people left behind. And I have to say the kind of fantasy politics of Syriza, which would see us out of government for a generation.
Liz, can I help you on this? The problem for centre-left parties is where they've implemented austerity in Spain, France, Italy, Greece, they've lost office in some cases, lost a lot of members and lost a lot of influence. There's a whole generation out there that do not accept the orthodox economics of austerity and are looking for something different.
All right, I understand that. Andy Burnham, would you have Jeremy Corbyn in your shadow cabinet?
I don't know if he wants a job. Maybe not shadow chancellor on the back of what he's just said, but I might be open to
you really have Jeremy
listen.
in your shadow cabinet?
I think he said things in this contest that are important and people have responded to, clearly. So I think the Labour Party's got to come back together after this leadership contest.
Yvette Cooper?
I'm not going to prejudge or somehow...
He must have some thought. If he might win, but if he comes second or third...
Really? Do you think politics is
I'm not going to...
Would you not offer him a job?
I'm not doing it, drawing up shadow cabinets in advance of the leadership election. I don't think that's the right thing to do. But there's a lot of things Jeremy and I disagree with. However, I think I just disagree with both Jeremy and Liz on the Greece issue, because I think the real problem for Greece is that the Eurozone, the other Eurozone countries have been imposing on Greece something that is simply undeliverable. It's unsustainable. You cannot bring your debt down unless you actually get the economy growing.
Why would you stay in a club that does that to you?
I think we're going to be affected either way.
No, I'm talking about Greece. Why would they stay, given what's just been forced on them?
I thought you were asking about Britain, right. I think the problem for Greece is that I don't think they should have been allowed to join the Eurozone in the first place.
Right.
Once they're in, it's so damaging for them if they come out. But the rest of the Eurozone...
All right, I need to move on, but in fairness, I have to... Jeremy Corbyn, if you win, will you have any of these three in your shadow?
I want a very broad church in the Labour Party, and it is a very broad church. I also want...
Would you have Liz Kendall?
Listen, I want democracy in the Labour Party. I want elections to take place for shadow positions.
Do you want to have Liz Kendall?
Well, she would be there.
Oh, but you
wouldn't
I'm
sure Liz and I could find some common ground on some issues somewhere. We may not have the same economic direction.
We've still got time to see...
How long is this programme going to go on for? We can find that common ground.
I think it may have to be a marathon.
Let
me come on to the campaign and the kind of line, the positions that you've all been taking. Andy Burnham, why do you keep attacking the Westminster bubble when you are a full-time, fully paid-up citizen of the Westminster bubble?
Not.
You spent your whole working life in the Westminster bubble.
Absolutely not. I am one of few MPs who represents the place where I grew up, and I've always lived there. I've never spent my weekends down here, and when you do that, it has a habit of rooting you in the real world, because I go back and I go out with the people I played football with, the people I went to school with. That is me.
You've always worked from a mile from where we are. Tell me one job you've had that's not the Westminster bubble.
I worked for a newspaper. I worked for a publishing company before I came into politics.
For how long?
Pardon? For about 4 years. Before I came into
What was
politics.
the publishing company?
Baltic Publishing, if you must know. And
your first job was working for Tessa Jow.
Oh, it wasn't.
As a researcher.
Doing your research, Andrew. Do your research properly.
You've always been in the bubble.
No, because I visit the bubble on a regular basis, but I always go back to my constituency, and that is important. Too many people
Every
in politics...
MP goes back to the constituency.
One second. Too many people in politics are parachuted into the places where they represent, and they don't have an authentic connection with those places. And that is one of the reasons, in my view, why politics has lost touch with people, because people don't hear their MPs speaking for them in a way that they can relate to.
All right. Liz Kendall, John Prescott said that he didn't think parliamentary researchers should run for leader after one term in Parliament. Who do you think he was talking about?
It might have been me.
Might have been.
But
I think it was.
I've done a few jobs outside politics, and I've worked in politics, and you know what? I am proud that I helped the Labour government make some of its great achievements on childcare, on support to work for lone parents, and on big changes and improvements in the NHS. But I think what people really want in a leader is someone who listens, who sets a clear direction of travel, and who can say sometimes the uncomfortable things to their party as well as the easy ones. And I think that's part of the judgment that Labour Party members will be making.
Yvette Cooper, you're a fully paid-up member of the Westminster bubble too, aren't you?
Well, we've all been part of, both the three of us at least have been part of the Labour shadow cabinet for the last 5 years that lost the election.
You basically came straight out of university and went into the Westminster bubble.
Do you know, it's worse than that. I was actually a journalist for a while. So, you know, as you know...
So things could only get better.
My first job, curiously, was working on a farm, driving a tractor, but I wasn't particularly good at that, so I don't think that really counts.
So, I mean, you have been an MP since 1983, but perhaps, are you more in a, not so much the Westminster bubble, but are you in a kind of Trotskyite bubble of your own, which is why the Tories are desperate for you to win this election?
Well, I've worked as a trade union organiser. I've done lots of other jobs before that, and I've been an MP and very proud to be for the last 30 years. My passion is for human rights. My passion is for equality. My passion is for democracy. My passion is for peace. And if we're just going to throw labels around, as so much of the media do in this campaign, that's not helpful.
But
people in the Labour Party are crying out for something different.
Does it trouble you that you are the favourite among Conservatives to win this election?
Well, this rather ridiculous story keeps flowing around and around. Anyone that registers to vote in this election has to register that they're a Labour supporter, going to remain a Labour supporter. Personally, I'd rather they joined the party and became full members of the party, so we have a stronger party. Okay. We're now up to 250,000 members and growing very fast, and I want it to be much bigger than that.
Liz Kendall, what does it say of your party and this campaign that some Labour supporters started a Facebook page called Liz Kendall for Conservative Leader?
I've been saying we need to be back great businesses, be for sound public finances, a great school in every area, strong defence, and for real welfare reform. And if people think they are Tory values, then the Tories will be in power forever.
But that's what a chunk of your party seems to think. And my question was, what does that say about the way your party is going?
Look, I'm used to criticism. It's never nice, but I'm tough enough to take that on. And we as a party are going to have this debate out, because if we do think those things are Tory values and Tory policies, we won't reconnect with the people who don't trust us on those issues.
But this is no party. This is no party for Blairites now, is it?
I think party members rightly want us to, move on from where we were in 1997 and 2005. But what I do take from the victories that Tony Blair won and Harold Wilson and in 1945 is that our values remained the same, but we applied them to the world as it is, not as we wish it would be.
But Blairite
and
for
we
you
spoke,
has...
And the second part of it, Andrew, was that we didn't think it was bad to try and get people's votes who'd voted Tory before. We didn't think that was a bad thing to do. And unless we do get people who voted Tory to support us, we won't be in government.
You're now in the
and
party.
We won't be able to make the
You're in the
changes
party
forward.
of Owen Jones and Len McCluskey. They use Blairite as a term of abuse.
But there have always been, lots of different views. I mean, you must have seen all the battles in the party over the years. And I'm prepared to have that out. I'm prepared to say that being a modern, outward-looking party that wants to appeal to our more traditional working-class heartlands and Middle Britain is a good thing to do, not just because...
Andy Burnham and then Jeremy.
Liz is making a really
Andy
important
Burnham
point.
first,
Liz is making a really important point because our manifesto was too narrow. The general rule I had at the election just gone...
I thought you said it was the best manifesto you'd ever fought under.
The general rule I had, I'll come back to that, was that the longer the drive you were walking down to knock on the door, the less you had to say to the people who opened at the door. I did say it was a good manifesto, but...
No, you said the best.
In my constituency, I had more to say to people who lived in Lee at this election, but the manifesto didn't say enough to the country. So
why is Blairite now a term of abuse?
An important point. It's not.
In your party?
Of course not.
It's not?
Andy.
Well, I mean, you've talked about Labour having lost an emotional connection with people.
Yeah.
But maybe you're wrong about your party supporters, that lots of them, they're party activists, they do have an emotional connection with Labour. It's just that they're voting for Jeremy Corbyn and not you.
No, I'm talking about the public. I'm talking about people who voted UKIP at the election.
But the public don't have an emotional connection with any party.
Just one second.
Only people like
I'm
you have
talking
that.
about people who voted UKIP in large parts of the Midlands and the North. I'm talking about people who voted SNP in Scotland. Those people are looking at us and they see a party that's out of touch. They see a Westminster elite that has not got its feet on the ground in their communities, and that is what I'm going to change.
In the end, we can't win the next election if we just rerun the 2015 election, but we also can't win it if we just try and run the 1997 election again. So this has got to be about 2020 and the future.
Only half of
Otherwise,
the
we
young
will
people-
not win. We've got to reach out in all directions.
Only half of young voters who are registered to vote, and that's probably quite a low number anyway, actually turned out to vote. We didn't excite or inspire young people. We disillusioned a lot of working class voters because we were essentially offering more of austerity and a continuing wage freeze in the public sector. We have to have a totally different economic strategy to win people back to the party.
It is a myth to think that if we get all the people who didn't vote to vote for us, that we can form the next government. We have to convince people who voted Conservative and Liberal Democrat and UKIP
and
to vote
the SNP as
that
well,
is
because
right.
if we don't reach out to the SNP,
hold on,
as
let
well
Liz
as
Kendall
UKIP,
finish and then I
we
come
will
back.
have a problem.
I grew up in Watford, which has now got a 10,000 Tory majority, yet we held that seat between 97 and 2010. The people that I grew up with, my family and friends who still live there, voted Tory because we didn't provide a credible, positive alternative. We have to change in order to get their support
All right,
back.
let me move on now to foreign affairs as our final subject. Now, Jeremy Corbyn, you've invited Hezbollah, Hamas, the IRA to Parliament in the past. You've called them your friends. Is there any terrorist group beyond the pale for a cosy chat on the House of Commons terrace with you?
I invited a number of groups to discuss the Middle East into a meeting in Parliament and welcomed everyone to that meeting as friends because they were coming in prepared to have a serious discussion. You do not bring about peace anywhere in the world without talking to people who you may not agree with. Look at how we dealt with Northern Ireland. Look how what is now being dealt with in Colombia, where the FARC are in negotiations with the government of Colombia in Cuba, and look at the whole process in the Middle East. If you just put people into silos and say, I'm not going to talk to you because I don't agree with you, you will never bring about peace.
In what way are you proud to have Hezbollah as your friends, the supporters of the Assad regime?
I have met them. I don't agree with many of their strategies or policies. I obviously don't agree with the violence that goes with it, but there has to be the bringing out together a peace process. You also have to look at the way in which Israel has, how should I put it, bombed the Gaza Strip into it's an appalling,
I'm talking about
appalling
Hezbollah.
mess. Wait a minute, it's an appalling mess, and so there has to be a peace process that brings about reconstruction and brings about reconciliation. You have to talk to people.
On Northern Ireland, you didn't just deal with Sinn Féin. You dealt with the IRA 3 weeks after the Brighton bomb, in which the IRA had tried to destroy the democratically elected government of this country. You invited 2 convicted IRA terrorists to the House of Commons.
They were former prisoners who had come out of prison, women who had come out of prison, came to Parliament, actually in a meeting that had been arranged long before, to talk about prison conditions and rehabilitation of prisoners.
They were IRA.
Is there anything wrong with that, since they had a spent conviction?
They had their organisation had just tried to blow up the British government.
The whole history.
Did you not think about that?
Of course I thought about it, and
you still invited them in.
And I wanted a peace process. That's why I maintained a level of contact with Sinn Féin throughout that period, as indeed secretly the British government.
You didn't want a peace process. You wanted a united Ireland. You saw Northern Ireland as an imperialist colonial situation.
I do believe ultimately Ireland should be reunited, but I also never believed, and I don't think anybody else did, there was ever going to be a military victory for either side in Northern Ireland.
Right.
There had to be a peace process, and there was a peace process, and I am not ashamed of those of us that had the courage to step outside and say there has to be discussions that involve
with
people from the
that
Republicans.
just tried to blow up the government.
With discussions with people in order to bring about a ceasefire, which did indeed happen, and the second ceasefire finally brought about the Belfast Agreement. Surely that is a good thing, and that's actually a great achievement for Mo Mowlam and that Labour government.
Once this contest is over, it is likely that David Cameron will bring forward a vote in Parliament to extend our bombing raids against Islamic State into Syria. If you're leader of the party, will you support that, Yvette?
Well, he hasn't put the evidence or the case to us, and I actually think it's really important that as an opposition, a responsible opposition, you look very carefully at that
So
case.
would you be unlikely to support it?
Well, we're obviously involved in military intervention in Iraq.
I know all that. I'm talking about Syria. We haven't got much time. I'm trying to get a straight answer to what will be the big foreign policy issue of the autumn.
And the big questions about any intervention in Syria is it in line with international law? Is there a clear military objective and a clear moral objective? Because, of course, in Syria, the Syrian government is led by Assad. There are huge problems with that. And there are huge problems about who and what, in fact, you would be backing and what the implications
That sounds
would be.
like a no. That sounds like a no.
No, it's about being responsible.
I hear what you're saying. I need
to
get everyone else in. Liz Kendall, yes or no? Would you back it or not?
There would have to be a clear military objective about how us joining the campaign with the US would add to what they're already doing, and it would have to be part of, to be honest, a much broader and wider political strategy in the region. You know that there are still huge problems with countries in the region and the support they're giving the new Iraqi government.
That's
those are the clear
interesting
criteria.
caveat as well. Andy Burnham.
I won't rule it out, but we'd have to proceed cautiously and on the basis of the evidence. We haven't yet seen the government's case, but I don't want Labour to just sit on the sidelines as these terrible events are taking place. But I was one of those who urged caution over Syria in the summer of 2013, and Ed Miliband was right, in my view, to ask for a pause at that point. This party will face a sobering moment when the Chilcot report is published, and we need to learn the lessons of our past and be seen to learn those lessons.
And the final word on this goes to you, Jeremy Corbyn.
No, I would not support the bombing of Syria. What I would support is choking off arms supplies and finances for ISIL, further support for the refugees, and the development of some kind of wider peace process. And I think the good news this week of the nuclear deal in Iran provides the atmosphere in which that wider debate and wider peace process can take place. Bombing will not solve it.
OK, time now for our 4 candidates to make their final pitches to you and why they think they should be leader of the Labour Party. They've just got 30 seconds, and it's in reverse order. So, Jeremy Corbyn, you go first.
I was nominated for this contest by people who wanted to see a different Labour Party and wanted to see a change. We're desperate that we lost a general election, and I believe we lost it largely because we were not offering something sufficiently different from the Tories. I think the way forward for Labour is to recruit more members, become a much stronger social movement, but above all have an absolute passion to end inequality and poverty in Britain, provide decent, good public services to people and invest in a growing economy. That, to me, is the way forward for our party.
Thank you, Jeremy Corbyn. Andy Burnham.
I am Labour because I believe it represents the best hope for millions of working people. Some of the best advances we have seen, from the National Health Service to the national minimum wage, have come from Labour governments. But the hard truth now is we have lost our emotional connection with millions of people in our country. They look at us, they see a Westminster elite talking in a language they just don't understand. I am standing to change that. I will put Labour back in touch with you. I will give you a party you can believe in and a vision worth voting for.
Andy Burnham, thank you. Liz Kendall.
There are now only 24 seats with a Tory majority of less than 3,000, and we've got to win back 94 to be in government again. And the scale of this challenge means we can't stick with what's comfortable and familiar. And if we move to the far left, we'll be out of power for a generation. I know Labour Party members want to win, so we can put our values into practice and make the changes we're all so passionate about. We achieved great things in government. Vote for me, and I'll make sure it happens again.
Liz Kendall, thank you. Yvette Cooper.
I wish we weren't having this debate now, because I wish we'd won, but we didn't. Labour didn't earn enough support across the country, and we have to rebuild to do that. We'll only do that with an optimistic vision for our future, supporting high-tech jobs, but also tackling injustice. But people are going to say to you that you have to choose between your heart and what you care about and your head and what's needed. I think we have to do both. We have to have people voting Labour with both their hearts and their heads. That is why I am standing for the Labour leadership.
Yvette Cooper, thank you. And my thanks to all four of you for this debate. That's it from the candidates for the leadership of the Labour Party. We hope you found the debate informative, perhaps even enjoyable. We did our best. Now, the Sunday politics where you are.
Hello and welcome to the London part of the show. I'm Jo Coburn. Coming up later, with protests on the streets over the capital's housing situation, will the government's proposed shake-up of the planning laws really provide a solution? I'm joined for the duration of the show by Bob Blackman, Conservative MP for Harrow East, and by Clive Efford, Labour MP for Eltham. Welcome to both of you. Now, the Home Secretary, Theresa May, has refused to allow the use of water cannon in England and Wales after 3 of them were bought by the Metropolitan Police. Kate Ford has more.
The Home Secretary has made her position on water cannons unequivocally clear in the Commons this week.
On the basis of the evidence provided by both the police and the relevant independent bodies, I can inform the House that I have decided not to authorise the Wasserwerfer 9000 water cannon as a policing tactic for operational use in England and Wales.
But only last year, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, authorised the purchase of 3 second-hand cannon at a total cost of £329,000. Labour's Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, said Mrs May's decision was exactly right, but the Met Police said they were disappointed. Water cannon are used in Northern Ireland but have never been deployed in the rest of the UK. They were deployed most recently in North Belfast on Monday against loyalist demonstrators during the annual 12th of July celebrations.
How embarrassing, Bob Blackman, for the Mayor. There we have Theresa May, same party, publicly pouring water on his water cannon plan.
Well, clearly what the Home Secretary has done is looked at all the evidence, looked at the submissions from people, and quite rightly decided that policing should be by consent. And water cannon clearly goes against all the grain.
Should Boris Johnson have bought those water cannons second-hand? They may be, but should he have gone ahead before he'd asked permission?
I think he's quite open about this. What he should have done was looked at the examination and seen whether he could get permission for it before the cannons were bought, rather than afterwards. And I think that's the thing that should have been done. I think it's regrettable. But I think the right decision has been made for Londoners.
And what a waste of money. £350,000
well,
down the drain, you might say.
No doubt we can sell it to someone else. Perhaps we've got it on a sale or return basis.
Will you make sure? Because I'm sure constituents in London will be concerned that that's
Absolutely.
a waste of public money.
Yeah.
Should the police have the resources they want?
No, they shouldn't. They are accountable to Parliament and to the Mayor. But he's wasted this money on broken water cannon. I'm told that they need repairing, so before we can sell them on and try and get our money back, he's going to have to spend more money on them. What a complete farce. But no, the Chief Police are accountable to to Parliament, and we should be the ones that decide whether water cannon can be deployed against our citizens. And I absolutely agree with what Theresa May has done.
All right, well, they're not going to be used, it seems. Thank you, gentlemen. Now, last week, the government announced widespread reforms to the planning process, aimed, they say, at cutting unnecessary red tape and bureaucracy, which they claim is clogging up the planning system and depriving London of the new housing it desperately needs. But is it really the solution to London's housing problems? Andrew Cryan reports.
Could this building site in Tottenham Hale be the solution to London's housing problems? One of 30 new housing zones in the capital, it's a model the government want to build on. Now, the idea behind a housing zone is that if you speed up the planning process, it will help more houses be built. So what happens is local authorities bid for special money and special sped-up fast-track planning permission from City Hall, and then you get sites like this. A whole range of measures designed at speeding up the planning system were announced last week by the government, including automatic planning permission in principle being given for housing on brownfield sites. It also means new powers for City Hall. Tall buildings that affect our skyline will now be signed off by the mayor, not the government, making the process up to a year quicker. There'll be more housing zones like the one in Tottenham, more powers over compulsory purchase orders, and automatic planning permission given to people who want a loft extension, so such planning applications no longer clog up the system. But according to Labour, handing out more planning permission isn't the answer. The capital currently has over 250,000 homes with permission granted. The problem is the homes aren't being built.
They aren't being built because a lot of developers will just sit, and property owners will just sit on the land and the planning permission, waiting for the value to go up and up and up. And others need funding from government, from the mayor, to actually enable them to get building. But this is, what's being proposed is a fig leaf for a shameful failure to really get the homes built we need.
Protesters this week outside Brixton Town Hall, campaigning against the demolition of a council estate to make way for new homes, but also the increasingly unaffordable housing market in London. Many of the people we spoke to were sceptical of the government's plan to free up the market, preferring investment in council housing.
They're not encouraging councils to build, which is what's really, really needed. So they're not investing in local government housing solutions that we know have worked. And we know the private market isn't working. It's no good to build homes that are going to be used as investment properties or assets for people. We need homes for ordinary working people.
The fundamental problem is that housing has become a commodity, not a place to raise a family, not a place to have a home. You've got to tackle it at its root, take the heat out of the housing market and invest that money in council housing. So Osborne is going maybe 10% of the way. He's certainly not investing that money in council housing because we're seeing the right to buy now extended to housing associations, which is going to make the problem worse, not better.
But if it's more council housing some people are after, they might be disappointed by the government plans, which are emphasising making it easier for people to buy their own home, an idea backed by City Hall.
The mix is changing, but please remember that a third of central London is actually owned by local authorities. So there is an awful lot of social housing out there already. What we're short of, desperately short of, is low-cost home ownership models which people can afford. And there's thousands upon thousands of people going after every unit that comes available in these categories. So we need far more of that.
While many agree London has an enormous need for more housing, the debate about how to get it made and what type of homes we build is certain to rumble on.
Andrew Cryan there. Bob Blackman, I mean, we could see in that film demonstrations going on, police officers injured by protesters last Sunday, hundreds on the streets in Brixton. I mean, your government's record on housing in London is now so bad, it's leading to unrest on the streets. I mean, how bad is it going to get?
Well, actually, the position has dramatically improved over the last 5 years as we built more homes in London.
And how many have you built over the last 5 years?
Over 100,000. And the reality is that the target now is 200,000 by 2017, 2018.
Right. But would you say you built enough homes?
No,
enough of the right
problem
sort of
has been the supply. The reality is that the government have taken action to make sure that money is available to provide new homes. There's various different schemes. But I think the key point is that until we increase the supply, particularly on brownfield sites, particularly those that are owned by the public sector, we're actually not going to address the problem.
Right. Do you agree with that being the issue, that it is about the supply and unlocking brownfield sites? And we'll talk about whether all of these sites will be appropriate. Is that the start to just building more homes so that there are more to choose from?
No, doing that alone is not enough, because we're not building the right sorts of homes. We are pricing the younger generation out of either the rental market or the home to the buyer's market, and that is what is fundamentally wrong. Under this government, the number of houses being built dropped below the levels that were being built in the 1920s. An absolute disgrace. And what we need to get back to is building homes that are truly affordable.
Right. And what does that mean in your mind? Because we've heard in that film there, it's got to be low cost, but still home ownership, not necessarily that the priority should be on council homes or social housing.
Well, the problem's not going to be solved by just flogging off social housing association properties and council properties. That's just a nasty little attempt to buy votes. But what we need to do is to get back to building homes that people can afford to rent, bearing in mind that this idea that people who live in social housing lack aspiration has always been a myth, and it's always made me very angry.
And should they be allowed to buy those homes at a subsidised cost?
Only if we are replacing the supply, and that's the key. We've never, ever done it. And it's, for every 10 that have been sold, one has been built in the past, and that is what's wrong.
Do you agree with that? Because the result of the new obligations to build reduced-cost starter homes will mean that London will see fewer new socially rented homes. Is that really the direction you want to go in?
I think clearly we want to get a mix. The reality is that, for example, the right to buy for housing associations is really unfinished business. We had a position whereby housing associations effectively became the supplier of socially rented accommodation, and their tenants didn't have the right to buy. That's being addressed, and we'll address that. The key now is actually to make sure that there are homes that people can afford to buy. That's really a big shortage in London.
Why should people have their homes or their rent subsidised when people in the private sector will not get that sort of assistance?
Well, this is one of the key challenges, and one of the points that was made in the budget is that there will be a progression of rent reductions in the socially rented sector to enable people to be able to afford the houses they're renting, or the flats they're renting, and to make sure that the supply continues. The key, as Clive quite rightly says, is when houses are sold, they should be replaced, and that's the key challenge.
But how do you compel builders to start actually building the homes? They've got permission, they've got the site, and they're just holding on to the land to see if the value goes up. Should you compel them?
Yes, we should. We should be saying to them, either use it or lose it.
Right.
And that's exactly what the Labour Party said.
Except no one voted for it. I mean, no one went for it, did they?
Well, but that's one of the policies that we were putting forward, and it doesn't mean we were wrong to put that forward. I think we were absolutely right. But the other point is that the budget did nothing for the future of the housing market. The Office of Budget Responsibility itself says that investment in private sector housing will drop by at least 1% over the next 5 years, and that 14,000 fewer social rented houses will be built. This is just not the right direction.
What's wrong with use it or lose it? I mean, that was one of the policies that Labour campaigned on. They didn't get elected, but now when there is such a critical situation in London, isn't that what you should do?
Well, one of the problems I can take in my constituency, we had a site which it took the developers 6 years to get planning permission.
Right, but hang on, we're talking about people who've got the planning permission, they're still not building.
But the point about this is that developers are trying to get planning permission. It takes a long time to get that. Then you've got to get the finance in place to build the property.
And that's because they don't want to build social housing.
It is. That's what they're sitting back on. They will not contribute towards building the homes that local authorities need, and that's why these debates about the planning permission
or they can't afford it, Clive. I mean, if the finances aren't there, they're not going to build them at all.
But these developers are making huge profits from these developments, and it's absolutely essential that they contribute back to the communities that they are building in, and to build a decent amount of affordable homes.
The same point is that housing associations are sitting on large-scale balances that they're not using for investment in housing.
We'll talk about this again. Following recent high-profile controversies with advertising on public transport, which has begged the question, what is or isn't appropriate to display on buses and the underground? The Sunday Politics, London, has obtained a copy of a letter from the Transport for London Commissioner, Sir Peter Hendy, acknowledging some mistakes in its advertising programme. Raphael Sheridan has more.
In February, commuters at Tottenham Court Road were greeted by lingerie models walking down the platform. Transport for London claims they had agreed to the shoot on the condition the models remained fully clothed. In April 2012, Stonewall ran this prominent advert. A Christian group, Core Issues Trust, responded that month with this. only to have it pulled by Transport for London just before its run. One of around 300 adverts it rejects every year. And in May, over 70,000 people signed a petition to remove adverts across the Tube network, which asked whether women were beach body ready. Sunday Politics London has received a copy of a letter written by the Transport for London Commissioner, Sir Peter Hendy, to London Assembly member Val Shawcross, who had complained about adverts she felt were derogatory to women. The letter said,
I accept that we need to review the application of existing policies on a continuous basis, both to learn from where we have not got things right and because customer perceptions will continue to evolve over time.
I think TfL have difficulty understanding these judgments, and, you know, they're an extremely competent public transport organisation. I think its male senior management sometimes doesn't have sensitivity to what the majority female population feel about some of these things.
So with next year's new advertising contract, the issue over what should or shouldn't appear on London Transport will be back on the table.
And joining us now, Labour Assembly member Fiona Twycross. Welcome to the programme. Why are you against adverts like Beach Body Ready?
Well, I think with the example of Beach Body Ready, we had a really strong reaction from a lot of Londoners that this really wasn't acceptable. And I think it's a sign that the times have changed and that we need TfL and their practices and procedures to reflect the fact that what might have been acceptable 20 or 30 years ago just simply isn't acceptable.
And
now.
you agreed it was offensive to women?
Well, I saw it and I thought it was offensive, and I think that 70,000 people signed a petition to say that they also felt it was offensive.
I mean, what constitutes, in your mind, an appropriate advert to have on London Transport?
Well, I think this is a matter for TfL. To be honest, I don't think that politicians should wade in and sort of start saying this advert's appropriate, that one's not.
But you have intervened here.
Well, I think my colleague Val Shawcross and other Assembly members raised concerns that that TfL needed to get the procedures and policies in place and to actually get up to speed with what's acceptable now and not just rely on sort of previous views about what might not have been acceptable.
Right, but it is about judgment, isn't
yes,
it?
It is
I mean,
judgment.
Do you think TfL is too male-dominated? It's sexist, if you like, if they can't see that that would offend the number of people that wrote in to complain?
Well, I think it's about making sure that we don't have images on transport that present unrealistic ideals about what the female body's like, and I think it can also relate to sort of male physique as well. So to make sure that women don't get an idea that if they can't reach those ideals, then they're somehow failing, and in this instance, sort of that they shouldn't sort of wear bikinis on the beach.
Do you think that's the role of TfL, to make those sorts of judgments?
Well, I think they've got an agency that they work with, and they've clearly got procedures in place. And I think that the letter from Peter Hendy revealed that over 300 adverts are amended every year. And I think there is a case to be argued that we need to make sure that the images that people see on the tube aren't offending huge amounts of people and aren't presenting an unrealistically idealised image.
Were you offended, Clive Efford? Do you think they were unacceptable?
I mean, they do look a thing of the past, don't they? Those sorts of adverts. I mean, you think we've gone beyond that, but it's a difficult subject, isn't it? TfL are responsible for running a transport system, not being a moral arbiter of what is appropriate advertising. And as much as they've held their hands up and said they've got it wrong, but there is is it acceptable anywhere? It shouldn't just be TfL.
But they've got the responsibility, haven't they, for their sites?
Well, certainly they have, but there should be some way of checking, through advertising standards or whatever, what is appropriate. Clearly, this has offended a lot of people.
But the Advertising Standards Authority said it wasn't offensive to women.
Well, maybe it's they who we should be talking to about some of these standards then.
Well, Bob Blackman, what's your view? I mean, should the ex-gay, post-gay and proud advert have been banned by Boris in April 2012?
I think the problem is that TfL is a public service. Every member of the public goes about their business. They'll see adverts on buses, they'll see adverts on the tubes. So they've got to be very sensitive to the aspects of the wide diversity of opinion, of background of people in London. And the reality is that makes them have to be much more careful I think, than any other private bodies.
Well, should there be advertising at all then? I mean, is it just not the right place and forum?
I think the
to have?
corollary is, remarkably, you see, this sort of advertising is there to shock and draw attention to something, and therefore probably succeeds.
Probably has.
But it's got more advertising, free-to-air advertising as a result.
Right.
And that's
so should you ban it?
That's where I think you've got to be very careful, because clearly there's...
Well, you've got to be very careful, but someone's got to make a stand here one way or the other.
Someone's got to make a judgment on these things as to what is acceptable and what isn't. I agree that we shouldn't have politicians doing it.
Right,
That's a
but
disaster.
is Transport for London the right people to make that judgment?
Well, I think they've got to make a decision. I mean, the fact that 300 adverts in a year have either been amended or culled suggests that lots of people want to use the advertising space for things that are deemed to be inappropriate at the moment.
Right. I mean, 70,000 women offended, but you don't want to go down the road of censorship here, do you?
Well, certainly not at the hands of politicians, but I do think that TfL need to set up a mechanism for themselves to ensure that they check what's appropriate and what's not.
Are you confident that they are going to put in place those sort of practices where you are going to be able to trust they'll make the right judgment in the future?
Well, the contract's up for renewal, and I think that what they've said is that they will bear these things in mind when they find a new advertising partner. And I think that we have to respect the fact that they have admitted they've got it wrong on this occasion. And obviously, as Bob said, the company concerned got a huge amount of publicity around it. But not all publicity is good. And I think that in this case...
Would you want to be seen with this product now?
Yeah, exactly. Would you want to be seen with this product? And I think that they misjudged it, TfL misjudged it, and times have moved on, and this is no longer an acceptable presentation of women on our public transport.
Fiona Twycross, thank you.
Thank you.
It's now time for the rest of the political news in 60 seconds.
Zac Goldsmith, MP for Richmond Park and Conservative mayoral contender, has said he will resign as an MP and trigger a by-election if the government go ahead with a third runway at Heathrow. However, he announced that should he become the Tory mayoral candidate, he wouldn't stand for re-election as an MP. The TSSA trade union will join ASLEF, the RMT and Unite in a strike next month over the new night tube service. Protesters disrupted flights at Heathrow Airport by cutting through a fence and chaining themselves together on a runway. Direct Action Group Plain Stupid said 13 demonstrators opposed to the airport's expansion plans got onto the northern runway. Nearly 10,000 people died in 2010 as a result of air pollution in London, a study has found. The scientists said combining the pollutants reveal a higher health impact than previously estimated.
Bob Blackman, let's pick up on the issue of air pollution. Nearly 10,000 people died in 2010 as a result of air pollution in London. What's Boris Johnson done to tackle this?
Well, clearly, cleaning up the buses is the big issue.
Is it?
That's the big issue in terms of directly under the mayor's control. The ultra low emissions policy, I think, is starting to work. The key, I think, is actually deliveries of lorries and such like in central London during the day.
Well, what about pedestrianising those key streets, Oxford Street, Regent Street?
Well, I mean, clearly one of the things that has to happen is that we've got to consider taking the buses out of Oxford Street, as the Mayor and Peter Hendy were considering.
Well, you're shaking your head, Clive.
Boris Johnson wasted millions of London's taxpayers' money on a vanity scheme to build this Boris bus, which is a massive polluter on our streets. So the idea that he's been cleaning up London streets is absolutely ridiculous. He didn't extend the congestion charge. He scrapped that as soon as he came in. We've been moving in the wrong direction under Boris.
Would you pedestrianise parts of central London?
I would, yeah. But I think there are areas where that is essential, but I'm not sure that is where's the traffic going to go. You've got to deal with the amount of traffic that's coming into central London. We need to have a much
reinstating
more
the congestion charge.
Much more root and branch look at how London streets are being used.
Right.
In fact, I'm very much in favour of what he's done with the cycle lane.
What would you do to try and alleviate some of that some of the traffic, rather, if not via mass pedestrianisation?
Well, one of the things I think is arranging for lorries to deliver in the early hours of the morning instead of during the working day, particularly at peak hours of rush hour and such like. Those are often what gives out the pollutants into the atmosphere, particularly when they're standing in traffic jams. And that's what we want to clean up.
They used to do that in ancient Rome. It's not a new idea.
Have we not moved on from ancient Rome?
No,
Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're moving at the same pace as well. The average speed around London is not much faster. So, but, I mean, we do need to have a fundamental look at it because the air quality in London is not acceptable.
Thank you both to you very much, and back to Andrew.
That's all from the Sunday Politics today. Indeed, that's it from us now until September. We'll leave you with a reminder of today's Labour leadership debate. And remember, if it's Sunday, it is the Sunday Politics. Unless, of course, it's the summer recess.
We have to convince people who voted Conservative and Liberal Democrat and UKIP to
and
vote
the SNP
That
as well,
is
because if we
right.
don't
But I'm sure Liz and I could find some common ground on some issues.
I have faced up to those difficult issues throughout this leadership context.